Hello friends, if you're new, welcome to my channel. How about going down, hitting the subscribe button and ringing the bell so you don't miss any episodes. Welcome back to my fans and subscribers, I really do appreciate you. Today's topic is Nebuchadnezzar's dream, coming from Daniel 2. Not much else I need to say, let's get on with the video. Nebuchadnezzar's dream scene in Daniel parallels Pharaoh's dream scene in Genesis 41. King Nabonidus is the only Neo-Babylonian king to attribute any significance to dreams. However, Greek historians suggest that Persian kings treated dreams as portents. This may explain why the writers of Daniel had Nebuchadnezzar treating the dream as significant. Neither Nabonidus nor the Persian kings would have fit into the time frame in Daniel. The closest parallel to Nebuchadnezzar's dream on record has been attributed to Median king Astyges. According to the record, he dreamed that a vine was growing out of the womb of his daughter. The Magi interpreted the dream to mean that his daughter's child Cyrus would become king in his place. Astyges attempted to thwart this unsuccessfully. Semantic experts, aka diviners, have many subcategories including magicians. The Neo-Assyrians imported this category from Egypt, which appear in the Joseph story. Exorcists were Babylonian experts specializing in diagnosing and fighting evil powers that attacked people. With all that said, let's get into the dream narrative. Although at first glance, the king's request seems straightforward to us, it is actually ambiguous. This is where translations kind of come into play, because not everything translates exactly. The word translated into English as to know can also mean to understand. Thus, the diviners assume he wants to understand the dream. Telling about the dream was also thought in Mesopotamia as part of the process for getting rid of evil effects brought about by such dreams. Because of these two things, the experts innocently asked the king to tell them his dream so that they may interpret it for him. Interestingly, it is at this point in the story where the narrative changes languages from Hebrew to Aramaic. When Nebuchadnezzar next addresses his experts, he clarifies his demand. Not only does he want the dream's interpretation, he also wants the contents of the dream. Some scholars, both past and present, have thought that this meant he had forgotten the dream. However, it is far more likely that this demand demonstrates the balance of power and knowledge between the king and his advisors. The king has knowledge that his experts don't have, yet he lacks the skill to interpret his dream. On the other hand, the experts possess a power of interpretation that the king lacks. Finally, the king recognizes that he will not be able to ascertain if the magicians are being truthful with him concerning the interpretation of the dream. Nebuchadnezzar uses both his knowledge of the contents of his dream and his power to punish or reward to establish a test that he thinks will be able to answer the question of whether or not he could trust his advisors. The king's anxiety about his dream can be seen in the way he reacts to his experts. That is, he sees their behavior as a conspiracy to make up a misleading interpretation, a benign interpretation to a menacing dream. Mesopotamian culture held that evil dreams could sometimes be dismantled by performing certain rituals. But if Nebuchadnezzar relied on a misleadingly favorable interpretation, he would fail to perform these rituals, leading to usurpation and possibly death. Therefore, his request that the sages recount the dream itself is a test to gauge whether he can trust their interpretation. Interestingly, we find a similar situation in the life of Astyges. Herodotus tells of a time in which Astyges' magi reassured him after an ominous dream, so Astyges did not kill his grandson Cyrus. However, Cyrus did usurp the throne. Astyges had the magi executed. The sages then start to panic, telling the king that it is humanly impossible to fill his request. That, they argue, is the domain of the gods. Thus, they foreshadow the divine revelation of the dream to Daniel. I should note here that Mesopotamian magicians did invoke the gods occasionally, but this does not fit what the story is supposed to portray. The authors want to contrast the Chaldean sages and the Jewish Daniel. Apparent contradictions between verses 13 to 16 and verses 24 to 28 lead many scholars to surmise that this part has been revised. In verses 13 to 16, the authors tell us that administrators look for Daniel and his friends, who, as part of the magician community, are to be executed. Daniel himself asks for an audience with the king, which suggests that he had access to the court. Verses 24 to 25 contradict the previous verses. In this scene, Daniel seeks out Arioch, who is the person that introduces him to the king, which suggests that Daniel is neither a sage or known to the king previous to this. The narrative makes sense without verses 13 to 23. So scholars believe these may have been written to adapt an older narrative to the present incarnation, incorporating Daniel's three friends. This edition also presents Jews as already part of a prestigious class. Arioch reminds us of the officials who helped Daniel in chapter 1, and in both instances, Daniel's skill at diplomacy averts disaster. In verses 13 to 16, Daniel approaches the king without an invitation, yet in verses 24 and 25, Daniel approaches Arioch, who takes him to the king. We find a linguistic clue of when this was written in verses 17 to 19. The word translated as mystery is raz, a Persian loanword to Hebrew and Aramaic during the Second Temple period. Thus, it is impossible to interpret this as being in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 27 serves to highlight Daniel's narration and interpretation of the dream, but it also serves to clear the sages of any accusation that they were participating in a conspiracy. In verse 28, we learn that there is a stark difference between Daniel's knowledge and the sage's knowledge. Daniel is able to interpret the dream because the God of heaven intended to give revelation to the king. Verses 29 to 30 are either doublets or a redaction. Why did the author make Nebuchadnezzar the receiver of this revelation? Ultimately, this narrative represents an attempt to get around the cognitive dissonance generated by the belief in the sovereign God of Israel and the fact of Gentile sovereignty on the earth. Attempting a resolution to this enigma had occupied prophetic and historical literature for centuries. Generally, the prophets identified foreign monarchs as chosen by Yahweh for specific purposes. Well, friends, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, press the subscribe button, and if you want to know when I come out with new content, hit the bell next to the subscribe button. My Twitter, Discord, email, and PayPal links are in the description, along with the source that I used for this episode. If you wish to support this channel, you may do so on my PayPal link. If you wish to get in contact with me, Twitter is the best way. Also, if you would, please leave comments in the comment section. Not only do I love hearing from you, but it also triggers the YouTube algorithm. Keep learning and searching for truth. Here are a few videos from my library. If you have not watched them yet, go ahead and watch them and tell me what you think. Until next time, friends, stay safe and goodbye.